We're excited to announce that our very own podcasting platform, Zencastr, has become a new sponsor to the show. Check out the podcast's discount link in our show notes and stay tuned for why we love using Zen for the podcast.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management, archaeology, and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 186 for March 25th, 2020. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about life after the virus and what it means for archaeology and CRM. So keep your distance because the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. Welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today is Bill in California in total isolation.
Hello, good afternoon. Well, not total isolation. My kids are still home with me, thank God. They're all here.
And Heather, also in California in total isolation.
I have kids, 2 cats, and a dog, and a husband. There you go.
And Stephen with his wife, Ruckus, and a pile of pens in Calgary.
I'm in a whole different country.
A whole different country. All right. And I am actually in the field. I'm down here in Ridgecrest, California.
Do they have toilet paper still in Canada? Because we're almost out here.
Some places, they put the throttle on the purchasing, I think, early enough. The last time I was at the store, They still had some, but the shelf was definitely lighter than it should have been.
Yeah, we're going to be having to ration each square now, I think. I have a feeling that's going to be the longest lasting thing, that we'll have to count the squares so that we don't go over.
Well, the rage of the future is going to be like Japanese toilet seats. So,
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad we have a bidet at home. We have it attached to our main toilet upstairs, and it's great. Although we left Reno a few days ago to come down to this project in California, and I never even bought toilet paper during the whole time that people were doing it, because I think we had just stocked up with another package of Costco toilet paper like a few days before that, before the whole crazy thing happened, because that was our normal time. Like, we were out, right? So we had to buy one. So I didn't even think about it. And then everybody started buying it. And now we came down here to Ridgecrest. I didn't think about bringing any with us because it's not the kind of thing you pack when you're going in the field. Well, you pack one roll, it's in your bag, but you don't pack like a whole bunch of them. And now we're down here in Ridgecrest. This Airbnb actually has 2 bathrooms, which we didn't know when we saw the listing. And there's 1 roll of toilet paper in each, and not a damn roll in the rest of the town. So, should get interesting here shortly. But as a friend of mine on Facebook pointed out, there's a shower next to each toilet. So,
shampoo and conditioner. Shampoo and conditioner is next.
I thought you were going to say that you got to a house that has toilet paper and you'd just forgotten because you're so used to the bidet. And I was like, no, remember, you got to use a piece of toilet paper and you have to use it, right? Like, just because you don't see the bidet doesn't mean you're opting out now. We're still using it.
Should have packed a bidet.
Yeah, I saw. Yeah. I know, right?
Just use your Camelback.
Think about it.
Just use your Camelback as kind of put the bag on the ground and just use the step on it.
So, Stephen, the
it's actually not the worst idea.
The hope is with Canada. I've been seeing multiple memes for hockey fans that because they canceled the NHL, that this will be the biggest impetus behind Canada coming up with a cure. So we're counting on you.
Well, they got nothing else to do. So
there you go. I haven't heard anything about Canada in this whole thing, of course. So how is it up there? And are you guys just making fun of us, or is it about the same?
It's pretty much the same. I mean, to a certain extent, there's a lot of making fun of you, but that there doesn't have to be a pandemic. Nothing new, right? Like that's
nothing new.
Right.
But yeah, there's a lot of closures, and it's wildly inconsistent, of course, because it's in the same way that in the U.S. it's by state, right? Like certain states are doing certain things, and other states are like, instead of closing everything, why don't we throw a giant party? Same sort of thing. Like different provinces are doing different things. But in generally, I think there is the strong push, at least on the social media side because I haven't really left my house. But there's a strong push to do the social distancing thing. And so I think that that's still, I think that's kind of on par with the US. I think that in some ways, Canada is going to deal with it better than the US. They're a tenth of the population. There's, it's wider spread. It's, there's actually a healthcare system. The problem, one of the problem concerns with the US is it's already starting kind of behind as far as healthcare goes, right? Like it's like you guys weren't doing good when there wasn't a pandemic, and now there's a pandemic, and you don't have anything to buffer with. And things are, I'm going to say, slightly better in Canada because at least it's further ahead at the start. How the system weathers the pandemic is, I guess will remain to be seen in the next few weeks.
That actually brings me to one of the first points that I wrote up here. Let's talk about travel as it relates to archaeology, because, and Stephen, you can keep going on this if there's any issues you guys are having up there, because you, like you mentioned, you're more spread out. People are clustered into fewer cities that are farther apart than, say, generally in the United States. So when you do archaeology, you probably have to travel quite a bit anyway. Are there any travel restrictions up there yet that are having an impact on that? Or you guys not even really started your field season in full swing yet?
It's -20 outside. Sorry. Yeah.
All right then.
It's like it was nice, and then we had a cold front come through, and nobody's doing field work right yet. I don't know of any travel restrictions off the top of my head. There might be some things for flights, but in general, I can't think of any real travel restrictions. But yeah, when we go out in the field, you sometimes hop in a truck with your coworkers for 8-9 hours. So
sure.
if any of those people are happen to be carrying the virus, then probably all of you will by the end of it.
Right. Well, and we have to note that it isn't airborne, right? So for that to happen, somebody has to sneeze, touch their face, touch their own saliva, touch something else in the truck, and then somebody else has to touch that thing. So it comes down to, you could still be safe in a car with 4 people as long as they're smart, right? As long as they're smart about how they're doing stuff. And hell, this is how we get the cold anyway. The common cold is transmitted the same exact way. And it's like, we don't seem to concern ourselves with that too much, even though 20,000 people died this year from the common cold, or from the flu, drastic version of the cold. But the point is, yeah, we can still be in a car together. Just don't be an idiot. You know what I mean? And call out the people that are being idiots, because that's a big thing with archaeology. You're totally right. There are crews right now all over the country, maybe not all over the country, but definitely in like California and Arizona and places where Texas, places where you can still do field work right now because of the weather, where people are jumping into field crew vehicles in the morning. And, it's possible, it's doable. Just be smart about it. They could, half the people in the car could have the virus. And as long as they're smart about it, the other people are not going to get it. That's not how it's transmitted right now. So it's like you can sit in a car next to somebody with AIDS. It doesn't mean you're going to get AIDS, unless there's some shenanigans going on in that car. But then otherwise, you're not going to get it.
I think that if the road trip is long enough, though, the likelihood of some accidental transmission is there, right? Like, you're going to rotate through and maybe, you wiped down the steering wheel, but maybe you didn't do a good enough job doing that, or
sneezes.
And I mean, everybody touches their face, right? Like, we try to be cognizant of it, but like eventually someone's going to like lean their chin on their hand or something, right? Like it happens. And I feel like, yeah, you can take measures to reduce the likelihood of it, but it can still happen.
Sure.
And still, like the longer time you're encapsulated with someone who's sick, the more likely you're going to end up getting it as well. And you might not ever show the symptoms, right? Like you can be asymptomatic while this is happening. And that's where the danger is. It's because you think everybody in the truck's doing okay, and one person's carrying.
Right.
I think that this is interesting it's exposed a lot of misnomers by people who are not field people. I work for an environmental company, so we have a lot of NEPA CEQA specialists and other technical, mainly the project managers, NEPA CEQA specialists that have no idea what we do in the field. When they see us in the field, they're thinking that we're walking, far distances. Like they think of transects. They don't see us like right now. I have a project where we're working in a trench and we have a discovery, and we are literally on top of each other. We're trying to fit in this tiny little trench and still excavate. And people they don't understand the nature of some of our work. And just like Stephen was saying, I agree with him. I mean, a lot of, and you too, Chris, I agree. There's a lot of control that can be done and prevent, exposure. And so there's no reason to have this major alarm. But at the same time, I think it's been interesting how this is, everybody's freaking out in the offices saying, oh my gosh, we have to have this distancing. Everybody's got to work at home. And, but field work, you guys are just fine. You guys can go out in the field and no problem. And they they have no idea what we do. And it's really kind of mind-boggling that they don't realize that we are in it doesn't even cross their mind. So I've just found that interesting.
Yeah. And in excavation context, you're pretty close to each other. And then not only that, but I mentioned something in relation to this in the Southeast United States and probably elsewhere. I think the Midwest does this as well in a lot of cases, but double occupancy hotel rooms. Yep. I mean, they're going to have to bid projects that don't have that during this, right? If they're still doing work, they really shouldn't be sharing hotel rooms, to be honest.
Or they're going to have to actually, in fact, give people individual rooms rather than billing for individual rooms and then double bunking everyone.
Well, that is another problem. Yeah, but you're right. You're right.
Going back to the whole travel thing, here the UC system is like pretty much shut down. Well, it's weird. It's like shut down as far as, all the functionalities of the university, but then still open for business, right? So, libraries are open, but you're not supposed to go to campus. Nobody's supposed to go to campus and teach, but you're still supposed to somehow lecture. In this semester, I'm teaching an artifact analysis class, so I'm supposed to somehow teach about artifact analysis without students actually analyzing or looking at any artifacts. That whole thing, as far as the way the university is working, it's in a weird state. However, I don't think they're giving anyone tuition back. On the other hand, the travel thing has pretty much come down like a blanket, but it's once again not applied in even way. So, I'm working with folks. We're trying to plan our upcoming summer research, and our first trip that we usually do to St. Croix to deliver the artifacts back, or at least the data from the artifacts. We don't always have all the artifacts processed, but we go down and work with our collaborators and stuff in the spring or in the winter. And then we get the permit to go next summer. Well, that was supposed to happen next week. And that's not going to happen not because the university said we couldn't travel. It said that we couldn't get reimbursed. First they said that if we traveled, we would have to go through a 14-day quarantine. So that means that I'm out because I have to teach, right? But now that's a moot point. Then they said they're not going to reimburse anyone for travel. So how can I afford to, pay for an entire field crew out there on my own money when we got grant? So essentially, we're still able to go and do it if we can pay for it all our own selves, and then also take 2 weeks off after we're done to self-quarantine ourselves. So, in the wake of that, grad students, projects that are going to happen. I mean, that's an interesting thing because graduate students a lot of times are on fellowships, right? So the way that they've set it up, if you're actually a graduate student instructor or a teaching administrator, a TA, you're getting money. You're actually a university employee. But if you were just doing this semester on a fellowship, and the fellowship's predicated on the fact of doing research or some other kind of work, and then they shut your lab down or you can't actually go to the field site, not all of the grants will. So first of all, you could say, congratulations, you just got money to go do research. Oh, wait a minute, your research isn't done. You know what? We'll put all that money back and you can apply next year. So they've got to wait like an entire year before they go and get data, right? So you could, and then, on the bigger note, if your fellowship lab shuts down and you can't do your research, then how are you don't get the work from home halftime thing, right? Like you were on this fellowship, you're supposed to do work. And the state doesn't have a system for people like that. I mean, either we just give them the money and then shut the lab down and say, okay, well, your entire year of funding is now gone, even though your lab was shut down. Apply next year. Mm-hmm. Maybe you can get it back. Or what's happening for a lot of folks for summer research is say, congratulations, you got the grant. But, since your travel shut down, this just goes on your resume and then apply next year and we'll give you the money if you win again.
Right.
Yeah, I think the upside of this whole situation is that necessity is the mother of invention. And I do think that people are starting to look outside the box and how can we communicate and how can we and Chris, you should love this because this means that the technology and the abilities that we have right now technologically that we're not taking advantage of are now going to be forced into the forefront, or we're not going to be able to do work. So such as, 3D imaging of artifacts. And, there's so many ways that if we had already been taking advantage of technology and embracing it, that the impact on our ability to do work could certainly have been lessened. There certainly would be an impact, but it wouldn't be as grave as it is right now. So I just, I think that's hopefully that this will be a silver lining and people start thinking outside the box, because I don't think that this is going to be the last time that something like this happens. And sure. There's really no reason why we should be so strapped to everything, from being paper-based to not being able to conduct any analysis, or, now we have tribal entities that are asking more and more for that which comes out of the ground to go back into the ground to be reburied. So we're not going to have collections, which I actually, it's probably good for a whole other podcast, but I'm not a fan of anyway. I'm a fan of utilizing existing collections, but if we can minimize the collections that are ending up in boxes and never touched again or looked at again. So just looking at, some really broad ideas of being a lot more efficient and technologically savvy in our discipline, I think is really important.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I had seen a news report that said that the virus lasts longer on more porous surfaces like cardboard and paper. So that's something to consider. I'm just going to put that out there. But also, we just recorded a whole Archaeotech podcast on Thursday, and we talked about working remotely and things you can do in archaeology. And you brought up something I didn't even think about, which is, things like WildNote, which I'm using on this project that I'm on right now, allow us to maintain that distance, because we can all have, I'm out here with one person right now, and I've got 2 other crew members, actually 4 showing up tomorrow. And we can all, though, take a point, record the information about an artifact. We're in radio communication. Somebody doesn't need to come over there. We're recording mostly isolates out here because of the nature of how these things are defined. But I don't need to go over there for every single isolate. I can radio in the number, and then they can just record it on their device, and it all goes back to the same central server. And somebody else in some other place, whether they're in the office or working from home, can now start processing those data. So that's a good point to end this segment on. Let's pick this up on the other side and continue talking about some of these limitations, but then also some of the benefits, because I think you're right. This could be a boon to certain technologies that we should have been doing all along. So back in a second. Chris Webster here for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We strive for high quality interviews and content so you can find information on any topic in archaeology from around the world. One way we do that is by recording interviews with our hosts and guests located in many parts of the world all at once. We do that through the use of Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr allows us to record high-quality audio with no stress on the guest. Just send them a link to click on, and that's it. Zencastr does the rest. They even do automatic transcriptions. Check out the link in the show notes for 30% off your first 3 months, or go to zencastr.com and use the code CRMARC. Looking to expand your knowledge of X-rays and imaging in the archaeology field? Then check out An Introduction to Paleoradiography, a short online course offering professional training for archaeologists and affiliated disciplines. Created by archaeologist, radiographer, and lecturer James Elliott, the content of this course is based upon his research and teaching experience in higher education. It is approved by the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists as 4 hours of training. That's in the UK, for those of you that don't know. So don't miss out on this exciting opportunity for professional and personal development. For more information on pricing and course structure, visit paleoimaging.com. That's PALEO imaging.com, and look for the link in the show notes to this episode. Welcome back to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 186. And, I'm hoping that one of the knock-on effects of this virus happening, because just so people have context, we're recording this on March 15th. So you're hearing this a little bit later. For all I know, there could be the only 3 people left in the entire planet listening to this podcast. So thank you.
Yeah, and I was going to say it could be like World War Z already, and you have way bigger things to care about than this podcast.
Right. I know, just a brief aside, we watched when it came out a few years ago, there was a TV show that I liked at first, but then it just got weird and I stopped watching it, was Last Man on Earth. And basically this guy thought he was the only one left, and it was some kind of virus that killed everybody. And it was just crazy because it happened fast. So he was able to go around. Grocery stores were still full of groceries. He could, still get things. And it was just an interesting thought. I've been thinking about that lately. But anyway, it's interesting talking about what we were doing at the last segment here about different technologies and things that maybe we should have been doing all along, but let's not dwell on the past. Let's talk about the future and think that what can we do now that will actually help us now, but also be helpful on into the future, because there's a lot of people embracing video conferencing. There's a lot of people who didn't think they could work from home, but now realize they could work from home. I've always said that most cultural or even environmental departments shouldn't have these big, massive offices where people go to office and into a cubicle every single day. It's 100% complete waste of money for projects that are on a budget. I mean, if you're already with a big engineering firm and they already have a big building because they can afford it because they build bridges and stuff, great. But if you're a small archaeology firm or any size pure archaeology firm, or pure CRM firm, I should say, then maybe you should be saving money, because our margins are already tight and people can work from home. People can work from anywhere they need to. They don't need to go into the office to write a report or do site records. And if you're like, well, I need to be able to communicate with this person. All right, there's 700 ways you can do that without walking down the hall. Let's just think about this. And now I'm glad that people are forced to think about this. Now they're forced to say, okay, what works, what doesn't work as far as remote communication goes. We communicate via Slack on the Archaeology Podcast Network here, and I'm on like 16 other Slack teams. I have Slack teams where I'm communicating with people in Australia. I'm communicating with people around the world. I'm communicating with another company over with the WildNote staff, many of which are down in Southern California. And it doesn't stop us. We've been doing that naturally for years. And now people that aren't used to that or have resisted that are now, I should hope, coming around to that idea and realizing that it's not the big, bad, scary thing that they thought it was.
Yeah, I think for one thing that's kind of going to be a detriment to that is that archaeologists are notoriously unorganized, and they're a lot of times not really self-motivated. And the people that are drawn to this discipline many times are, they really like to have, and I get it, because as long as you understand what your limitations are, but they like to have a task put in front of them, finish that task and feel, that sense of accomplishment, almost where there are some people that just do much better clocking in, doing their 8 hours, clocking out and leaving, and then being able to leave it at home. And it's going to require organization. It's going to require accountability. It's an easy fix to that is to have an office where people have to come in and they have to look busy, which is inefficient in and of itself, but at least they're accountable, where, you have some people that just do not do well in a work at home environment. They're just not productive. But the way to fix that is that you have people that are organized and that are staying on top of it and are making sure that you are accountable without having the easy fix of being in the same area as you. So I do think that, so many times because it's feast or famine, and because, we have all this time, then all of a sudden everything's piled on us at one time, and we're just trying to keep our head above water. And so we're not organized or efficient in the way we go about business. And then that just, it's a vicious circle. And so I do think that people need to be a lot more conscious in how they're organizing their projects and how they implement their tasks and efforts and how they delegate.
Yeah. And I think what this is going to do is, project management in archaeology it's not that hard, right? I mean, we don't have, when you really break it down compared to other project management in other industries, we don't have that many moving parts. I mean, we've got a couple, really well-defined steps, and yet people still manage to screw that up. But I think we're going to really find who's good at project management and who's not in this circumstance.
Exactly.
If people are doing exactly what you said, trying to control logistics and people remotely, I mean, you're going to have to be real organized and make sure that you've got, a handle on what's going on, and don't just rely on email. If you have to go back and search through your email for, 100 different emails that you were supposed to look for, you need to have some place where you're keeping track of all this stuff. I can recommend Trello. It's free and it helps me organize things, but it does take a minute to wrap your head around it for certain people. But there's other stuff out there, plenty of free things. Just find something that, you can use to organize your projects if you've never used something like that before. And hopefully that'll, help you keep it organized. So it's not all going to stay in your head. And you may have been doing that all along because you were able to do that because of the environment you were in. But it's just not going to be that way anymore. So, well, I did want to mention one thing real quick. So as I mentioned, it's March 15th, a Sunday. My wife and she's working with me on this project now that she's not working with her other business anymore. She's back to archaeology for little projects that we've got going on. And, we came down on Friday. The rest of the crew shows up on Monday, but we came down on Friday to kind of get a jump on some of the surveys so I could get my own handle as the field director on some of the logistics down here and get a little bit of survey done, because we've got somewhat of a tight time frame on the other end of this project as well. And I estimated what it was going to be because I have worked in this area before, but you never really know until your boot's on the ground. So I wanted to get out here and see if it was going to at least match the estimates and see where we fit on that. So we came down early. Now, we came down Friday afternoon from Reno, Nevada, and Friday afternoon, just a few hours before that, Trump was heard mentioning that now nothing concrete was said and nothing's happened since as of March 15th, but he mentioned considering possibly closing the borders to California and Washington. And I had actually mentioned that in the Archaeotech podcast. I said, hey, this is probably way out and would never happen. But let's think about how archaeology would be if they closed the borders to some big states or to all states and just restricted travel. And then the next day I hear that this is something that he's considering. And I don't know how, what that's like or what's not, but I'm pretty sure California's been preparing for that ever since they put up the agricultural stations. I know that those people standing there waving you through without even talking to you have machine guns sitting right inside there, and they can just close the borders in a heartbeat. I'm pretty sure California's ready for it. So,
well, also,
anyway,
I have a feeling politically and socially, there's a huge portion of people in California who would love the borders to be closed.
Exactly. Exactly.
To start our own country. This is the first time where finally we might be able to succeed. Just go ahead, close those borders, and we'll see you around.
Yeah. Well, and thinking about this, let's think about the situation over the summer, because we're starting up the field season in a lot of different areas of the country. And as we move through into warmer temperatures, we're kicking off the field season more and more. Now, everybody thinks that even if this virus gets really, really bad in the next month or so, it almost has to subside at least a little bit coming into summertime, because viruses have a hard time living in warmer climates and warmer environments. So as we warm up, theoretically, it should start to die off. And the hope is that it dies off completely and doesn't pick up again when it gets cold again. But so let's just assume that this goes for another couple of months, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. We all know that. But hopefully all this social distancing and closing of things makes that not true. But if it does, and things continue like this, I mean, this is really going to affect shovel bums in particular. I think a lot of people who are part of offices in bigger states where there's a lot of work in that state will probably be okay. But shovel bums that are like one's, living or working in Utah and they find a project in California, but now they can't get there, but there isn't enough work in Utah for them to do. And so, now they're stuck. Where are they going to go? And, travel between states for work like that is going to get really tough, and it's going to really matter. Heather.
Yeah, that's the as needed population has really been on my heart, just kind of trying to anticipate where this whole thing is going to go. And I'm hoping that we as professionals, whether it be we're in a mom and pop business like you, Chris, or someone like myself that works for a larger environmental firm, that we really kind of look outside of the easy business model and consider possibly swapping projects. Now, I know it's not going to be easy, but where we're CRM companies are starting to work with each other to, for those that are very state specific, where, okay, you know what, we were going to be in Arizona, but we can't now, and, communicating with other CRM firms, and where they may have a job in California that they can't support now. And we're really going to have to work with each other to make that happen, and not like dig our heels in and try to, hold on to things and stop work in an effort to hold on to everything that we have. Now, I know that seems kind of antithetical to business and giving up work, but, if it's done and everybody or enough people agree or work with that concept, it doesn't necessarily have to be separate or the antithesis of profit. It can actually benefit. It can promote profit, but it just means there's going to be a lot of people that are going to have to buy into it. And I hope that if it gets to that point, that people really start thinking outside the box. Number one, just to keep projects moving, and number two, so that our as-needed staff have ongoing work, that they're not put in such a position that they can't survive.
That was one of my biggest concerns, because I know how much effort employers here in the Bay Area have put into trying to find ways for folks to work at home and trying to find ways for school to continue on at home. I mean, we were given not really lesson plans, but all the assignments that need to be finished. And then, my wife and I, fortunately, we have the kind of jobs where we can work from home. We're able to actually set up some kind of schedule for us to be able to make sure our kids are still doing lessons while they're out of school, but also so that we can both work, so certain blocks of time I'm working, certain blocks of time she's working, and essentially the time, before the kids wake up and then after they go to sleep is then also additional work time. But I mean, fortunately, we're able to be in those kind of positions, but I was absolutely wondering, what happens to folks who are field techs that are supposed to be on some kind of Forest Service grant, and, they're shutting down all kinds of stuff. So even beyond closing the borders, like we saw what happened during the sequestration, what happened to CRM after, Forest Service and BLM and everybody else were forced to not work, even without pay. We saw how things kind of got trashed on the ground in some of the national parks, but also how, the SHA was, tons of people couldn't even make it. They couldn't get paid. They didn't show up. And I just wonder about administering these contracts that are given out to do work for government agencies when they're saying that they're going to close entire city governments or close entire Forest Service. I wonder if, how are companies going to be able to fill that gap and keep people paid and keep them on the payroll?
Yeah. And building on that as well, I'm interested in, well, like your thoughts on this, Heather, if you guys have talked about this at all, because, you're an employer and you work for a decently sized company, but let's say there's a lot of field schools, because Bill, you were talking about this as well. Let's say there's a lot of field schools that just can't get their ducks in a row in the next couple of months because of restrictions and end up canceling the field school. Maybe the virus is completely over. It doesn't matter. And maybe their field school is in a place where it also wouldn't matter, and everything is done. But the field school itself has to be canceled because of various administrative reasons of not being able to get it going. What do we do about the entire pool of new undergrads that are leaving the field, that are leaving college this May and June, and are expecting to find jobs in CRM after they have a field school or something like that, and get that minimum requirement that most of us require. And then by the end of summer, they're looking for jobs in CRM, and CRM companies aren't hiring them because they didn't have the field school.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big deal.
From my perspective as an employer, I actually do not require, if I have a real busy time and I have to hire people right now and I don't have time to train you, then I am going to be looking for somebody that has experience. More than often, I'm looking for somebody who has CRM experience. To me, a field school, I don't know what you were taught, to be honest with you. And a lot of times you dig way too slow. And you dig like an academic, and that's not helpful to me. So, I try to get out in front of things and hire people way ahead of time and start training them. I love training. I think maybe it's just because I miss teaching. And so it's an opportunity for me to teach. So I never mind training. I enjoy it. So for me, for somebody not to have a field school on their resume doesn't usually dissuade me from hiring them. It's more my conversation with them and whether or not I feel that just with at least doing the best I can with an interview and looking at the way they present themselves on paper, that they're trainable. I want to know if they're trainable. And if they're trainable, it doesn't matter to me if you have a field school or not, because I can make that up in one project, really. One week or 2 week project. I can train you myself, and then I get to train you the way I want you to be trained. So that's my perspective on it.
All right. Well, before we get into anything else, I think that's a good point to take our last break and then come back and wrap this up. Hopefully not the last CR Mark podcast. Hopefully we're all around in 2 weeks to do another one, but let's wrap this one up and come back on the other side. You may have heard my pitch for membership. It's a great idea and really helps out. However, you can also support us by picking up a fun t-shirt, sticker, or something from a large selection of items from our TeePublic store. Head over to arcpodnet.com/shop for a link. That's arcpodnet.com/shop to pick up some fun swag and support the show. All right, welcome back to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 186. And something we were talking about in the break here, because it's impacting our recording and has been for a while, so I don't think it's virus related, but it's something we were talking about on another show, is internet speeds. You guys might be noticing as you're working from home remotely that your internet connectivity health or integrity is degrading because a lot more people are working at home and a lot more people are doing video conferencing. Yeah. A lot more people are doing a lot of things that they maybe wouldn't have been doing normally. Now, people use the internet at work too, obviously, but working from home is just it's a different thing, and people feel the need to connect with each other a little more in a conferencing sort of way. So all those meetings that you would have at work, they're going to be happening over Zoom or over Microsoft Teams or Skype or something like that. And that's going to be sucking up a lot of bandwidth during the day. And people just need to be prepared for that as well. It's going to be an impact. So let's talk about some other stuff that could be happening here. I mentioned one good thing is that people might listen to more podcasts and consume more media, which is makes it time for us to ramp up our efforts on that front. It'd be nice to see some new shows coming out, or some new podcasts, or some new things that we can produce easily, and monitoring the social distancing regulations and things like that, and still get some new content out there. So that could be a good thing. But Heather, you mentioned some stuff about government projects and closures in our notes here. I think that was you, Heather. But how's that? Is that impacting you guys yet?
Actually, I think that was that you, Bill, that added that in there
about the school closure.
The government projects and government closures.
Oh, yeah, I did add that about government projects. I mean, as someone who works for the government, I'm keenly aware of how this whole thing is unfolding. And I can only imagine for all of I know what's going on my end, but I'm salary, right? So it's not the same thing. But, the people that we're supposed to pay, the people that we're working with, people we're collaborating with, I have no idea how they would get paid or how they would get any of their stuff. So as far as I'm concerned, the government is not really set up to continue its relationship with contractors or subcontractors. And I can only imagine how this kind of complicates things.
Well, that leads directly into another note that I know Heather put up here and that we were talking about before the recording, which is the California Information Centers. And I've been into a number of these, as I know you have, Heather. And I'll tell you what, it's usually just a sea of, a few desks and I'm really thinking of the Northwest Information Center, which is staffed mostly by people at Sonoma State. And the last time I went in there, there's like the director, and then there's probably 5 or 6 either grad students or interns or people that just work there. Yeah. And they're all sitting right there dealing with paper, doing record searches, passing stuff back and
Maps.
forth.
Yep.
And when you go do a record search there, yeah, maps, all kinds of stuff. So if these offices, now obviously not being able to go to these offices is going to be a problem if people are restricting travel, companies are restricting travel, but these are state and government offices. I'm willing to bet those are going to be closed at some point if they're not already. So what about record searches? How are those going to get done?
The SCCIC is already, which is down the southern central coast, which is down in Fullerton. They've been sending out emails like crazy since Friday. They are closed down. So they're not taking any more appointments indefinitely. They're not taking any kind of requests whatsoever until they can catch up. So, we're already having to send out all these, call outs to our clients, which incidentally, we had already done because the SCCIC has so many counties. They have ended up, they have like a monopoly in that area. I mean, it's probably a poor word choice, but the problem is that they have not, to me personally, Ventura County should go to the CCIC. They are completely overburdened and understaffed. And because of that, before this whole thing came out, we have been telling our project managers, the CEQA project managers, that we actually have a 6 to 8 week wait period in order to get a record search appointment. And that's crazy. Wow. And it's unnecessary because if I call the CCIC at University of California, Santa Barbara, I can call and literally get an appointment that day. And there's no problem. So there's obviously a workload issue here that is a major issue. And for some other political reasons, it's not being fixed. And it's wrong, in my opinion, personally, and I don't think I think it'll be popular with some and not popular with others, that I think it's an ethical question. We have a responsibility as archaeologists to publish, and that publishing is because we're supposed to be sharing our information so that we can build on knowledge, right? Well, if we are turning in our reports and our site records, and they're not being put into the system for years and years, how is that working? And then if we can't, in a expedient manner, get a record search done, and technically you really shouldn't be doing a search if you're doing a phase 1, let's say, which is usually why you do a record search. You really shouldn't be doing the survey until you know what you have out there, unless you've already worked in that area and you can you already have a sense, but you shouldn't be doing the survey. So that's basically you can't do anything really. When it comes to results, you can do nothing until you have that record search. And that it's so wrong on so many levels, and there's no reason for it because the workload is completely bottlenecked right now. And there's no reason for it because we have other information centers that are sitting twiddling their thumbs with plenty of time. So I think, first of all, it's an antiquated system. And, you look at other states that have everything online. And, we were talking about the, loops that you have to jump through with that, but it's certainly a lot easier than being able to do absolutely nothing for 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah. In some of the states with stuff online too, it does become an issue because like Nevada has a relatively decent system, the NEVCRIS system. But that being said, not everything is actually in it because they haven't had a chance to put everything in it. New stuff goes in there pretty easily, but not everything is in it. And I've got information that's about, 9 years old from Utah. So I don't know what their situation is now, but back when I was part of a record search back in like 2009 or something like that. So even more than 10 years ago, their method of getting things in digitally was as it was pulled from the archives, as it was pulled from the records, it was added to the system digitally, right? So they weren't going through at the time. Again, they may have fixed all this, but at the time they weren't going through and just proactively putting a bunch of stuff in the online system. They were doing it as people pulled them. So theoretically, the stuff that people wanted to see would get put in digitally. But that honestly doesn't make any sense because if you're putting all the stuff in digitally that was pulled for a certain survey area, well, nobody's going to survey that survey area again for 10 years in most circumstances. And So what's the point? if it's already been surveyed, you've already done the record search there. It's already been surveyed. I don't know. It's a weird system, but I think that's how some states are handling it. And you're right. It's a really sad state of affairs.
In many places they have, and I don't really know how the funding for this worked, but I know exactly what you're talking about, how the, use of those records was the impetus for them to digitize them. And I mean, I showed up in Arizona and Washington after they had already done what they were going to do. So I ended up benefiting directly from a digitized system. But in the state of Washington, not when I first got there, but after I'd been there a few months, they rolled out Wizard. And I think that one was the best one I've ever worked with, where once you've gotten your background check from the State Historic Preservation, or there it's the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. Like once you've already gotten that passed, then you were given a password and everything, and you could use your email of your employer to get into the system. And then you could look for a bunch of stuff, including the recent reports that have been submitted. A lot of them were just on PDF, so you could actually get many of the reports. The bigger ones going back to the 90s and 80s and stuff, you still had to actually find a way to get. But you could also see a map of where all the projects were at and where all the archaeology sites, their boundaries and everything. Now, once again, this was, 1980s and on, so I have no idea about the old stuff. In Arizona, they had a very similar thing too, AsSite, which once you'd pass the background check, you could get in and you could look at things. However, in Arizona, you still had to formally file to the Arizona State Museum for a records check, and then that was your official records check. So even though you could look and see all the sites and make your own map, you still had to get concurrence from the State Historic Preservation Office. And it seems like that's a, kind of a bottleneck. But what ended up happening is, you're paying the fee for membership to AsSite, and there's X amount of users. But in order to make sure that people aren't just digitizing magical data or just using whatever they felt like, they were, double checking and would send you a list in the, Polygon shape files and stuff to the company of where that site's at. So if a site's, location had changed, then you would have the most recent thing on how that had been expanded or how pieces didn't matter. And that might not be stuff that's readily available, but also they would go and look at all the ancient sites that were dug in the early 1900s and say, no, there was excavations in 1907 at this thing. And, it would help out on that. And those things weren't all digitized. So having those things like that in the internet is totally functional. But then once again, it goes back to your discussion about workflow and people working remotely, right? So will people actually stop watching Netflix long enough to make sure that table's done? And, can you get the person who's normally slammed mapping at your office with a high-powered desktop on their laptop to produce the same kind of GIS? Like, that's, if you're working from home, those are the kind of questions there.
Or, hey, let's thinking about GIS. Maybe the GIS department can switch to something like QGIS because they're spending 80% of their time producing location and sketch maps and don't need the power of Esri. So they can consider that as well. I
guess, but what about
it's all about using the right tool for the right job.
20% of the time. I'm still fond of the hammer.
Well, I hear you.
Sometimes you got to use it.
But hey, in the last segment of this podcast, I want to talk about some of the lasting effects that this could have and what it could mean for field techs, as Heather was mentioning earlier, because this thing could all be over in a few weeks, but the lasting impacts of this are going to be months and months and months. Because if we aren't able to do record searches in one of the, let's just take California. California does probably, I have no stats on this, but just from what I know and from what you see, California has a lot of construction, a lot of development, a lot of things constantly going on. And if a large portion of that requires a cultural resources assessment, and because of the California Environmental Quality Act and other things, it does. So if a large portion of that requires that to be done, and yet we can't do record searches at the information center, which is an initial usually requirement for some of these projects. And so that stalls and can't get done. And then let's say, I don't know, maybe construction companies, maybe some other things are saying, hey, we got to restrict who's going out there. We got to restrict all these things that are happening. Now you've got construction projects stacking up, and you've got companies not being able to make payroll. You've got all kinds of things happening. And I see places like Apple, shutting stores down, but still paying people, and other companies shutting places down. but still paying people. I don't know of very many CRM firms that can shut down and continue to pay people. I mean, it's just not a thing unless they're, a larger environmental firm. But looking at these lasting impacts, we could be dealing with this for a really long time. Just because the archaeology is being slowed down and can't start again, it might be a heck of a lot of work for us in 5 or 6 months, but it's not going to. It's going to take a while to kick back on again in some places.
I think that we have, we've talked about this I think we talk about it every podcast since I joined. And, and that is the fact that, this is you have to, as an as-needed employee, if you're in any discipline, but specifically for as needed in CRM, you have to jump on every opportunity you can to show what kind of skill set not only you have, but that you have potential for. So this is an opportunity. It actually is a unique opportunity for some as neededs that are willing to step outside the box and not only do field work and put their toe in the water of, I'm willing to start writing record search results. That's usually what I start people on when it comes to technical writing. I teach them how to write the results section for a record search. And, putting your hand up saying, listen, I know there's no field work. I am a quick study. That is, if you are, hopefully, I'm a quick study and I'll jump in. I'll do whatever you need. And I do have some people that have been contacting me and saying, listen, I'll do anything that you need in the lab, writing, anything. And those are the ones that are going to get the work just because they put their hand up. And so you never know what is going to come from that as an as-needed employee, because the more skills that you have, the more employable you are on a full-time basis. So this really could be a segue, a gateway to some people that have been stuck in that as-needed population and moving into the full-time market. So I think this is it's a cool time for people that are willing to seize the moment.
Yeah, that is great. It's great to recognize that. And that goes kind of hand in hand with a side hustle, because GIS and other things could be your archaeology side hustle. But we talk about side hustles on almost every podcast too, because it's that important to have another skill set that you can possibly fall back on. Have something else that you're doing on the side, and maybe turn Netflix off for a little while when you're in the hotel room. And or in our case, we always watch HGTV in a hotel room because we don't have cable at home. But turn that stuff off and learn something new. Maybe take this opportunity right now. I mean, sure, you might be trying to earn some money, but if you just can't because literally everything is closed, sure, be sad about that. But at the same time, flip on YouTube or flip on something else, go get Skillshare or something and learn something new. Doesn't have to be archaeology related, but learn something new that can possibly bring you some money. And maybe it's something you could do digitally as well, which would be even better. But, try that.
One more thing when it comes to, it's not just these tactical, tangible skill sets, but also, one thing that people kind of forget is the understanding, the regulatory understanding. And if you have that as an archaeologist, you're hugely employable, because so few people have that, especially if you're somebody who is more theoretical based. You went to school and you found, theory is more my thing, more than, the field. And so if that really lends itself well to learning the regulatory process and everything that comes with it. So, Thomas King actually just came out with a new book, which is a small little primer, and I've just started reading it. I think it's excellent. I mean, it's smaller than some of his other books, but supposedly he says it's his last book. But I think that we'll see, Tom. We'll see if it is. But I actually hope it isn't. Yeah. I hope it isn't. But anyway, I think that it is on you. Nobody's going to teach you regulatory language and understanding. You're going to have to do it yourself. And it takes a lot of not only reading and studying, but seeping yourself into practical understanding of it. And it takes time. So it's better to start that now, just like you said, doing it, in the evening after being out in the field, and start steadying yourself up so that you can start moving up.
Mm-hmm. Excellent point, Bill.
I'm glad you mentioned that because, well, two things. It'd be great to have Tom King on the show again. It's been about 180 episodes. So check in. He has written a new book, and he actually edited, I think, even one or two versions of cultural resource law in practice. So especially talking about a new paradigm, he's actually kind of a fan of changing the National Historic Preservation Act, and that these constant wolf tickets are not actually bad. They possibly give us a new way to move forward and stuff. So it would be good to have him on the show again. I totally forgot about, how great of a guest speaker. But the other thing that I've just become increasingly aware of is any kind of social media or online publication of any kind of stuff on the internet. Archaeologists just stare at it like it's, Halley's Comet or the end of the world or something, that you would ever try to do social media or Google Analytics or like start a blog and kind of break it down or do your own podcast. Like every single person, every time I mention that kind of stuff, they just stare at me like, well, I don't even know where to start that. And I was kind of like, but you somehow know how to extract enough carbon from an ancient antler to, check out the ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-14. Do you know how complicated that process is? But we do that. But you don't know how to just open Microsoft Word and put something on the internet and then pay attention to Google and write these. Like, they're way less complicated. But I keep hearing people that are, just they don't really actually think that social media strategies or anything online is something they could do. That's a side hustle in its own self.
Yeah, indeed. All right, guys. Well, that's enough for now. Hopefully we'll get another chance at this, and I think we'll probably all be okay. I fear for the industry a little bit, but I think it will rebound at some point, and hopefully we come out stronger on the other side with a workforce that understands working from home is not the enemy, and we can save a little money on our project costs by doing that, but also, maybe people come out with a few more skills that they can use beyond this. So trying to look at the bright sides of all this. We'll see if that happens. So, all right. Well, that's it for this week. Yeah.
I said, just make sure your kids stay alive and they don't hurt your mental health.
All right. Again, thanks everybody. And we'll see you next time. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.arcpodnet.com/CRMArcPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at arcpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field or, a hospital. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
I'm going to be the optimist. We will see you next podcast.
From a great distance.
We'll see you. Just stand back.
And don't breathe.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks, everyone, for... Jesus. I'm literally reading it, and I've done it 186 times. All right, here we go. Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.